Hey guys, what's going on? So, yesterday I was looking at Futaba's kit on Lufelnet because she is coming to us global players later this week, as well as a couple of the other servers. So, I was trying to prepare. And on Lufelnet, they kind of list what characters are coming out in order. And just kind of taking a peek at that, I noticed that there's two units that are going to be like 100% recommend pulls. One is Futaba, and one is going to be the last unit that we're going to cover in this video. And in between them was 5 units. And the thought occurred to me when I do like the Guild Boss and SOS videos sometimes with the new units, people will ask, hey, do you think I should pull this character? And I was trying to think what I would recommend on those 5 characters in between, and I actually wasn't really sure what I would say. So I went kind of and had this idea, what if I kind of briefly go over their kits, I read over their kits, and I say, knowing what we know because we have the benefit of foresight because we are behind, what do you do in these in-between times? And so that was kind of the idea for this. I'm not going to break down the characters too much, and obviously this is just a general recommendation. It all depends on your situation. If you're a spender, if you're free to play, if you pulled the last character in 10 pulls, or you went to hard pity the last 4 banner. It's all very individual. This is just like a general recommendation, and we're going to go off that. If you don't want any spoilers, obviously, maybe this is not the one for you. Futaba is on screen right now. We will be going several patches forward. So if you don't want to see any of that stuff, feel free to click off. We can start it off with the character who's on screen right now, who I mentioned is not only going to be 100% pull, but is also coming this week for us on global. It is Futaba. Futaba is a navigator, and she is a weakness implanter. So if you've ever played Honkai Star Rail, Futaba's drawn comparison to Silverwolf a lot. And reading her kit, I can agree. Although she does play different. Silverwolf takes the units that are on her team and will randomly apply that element as a weakness to an enemy. Futaba does not do that. If an enemy resists curse, Futaba is not making them weak to curse. Futaba is basically picking a character on your team, as far as I can tell without playing, just reading on Lufelnet. Say she picks Joker and the enemy is null to curse. That enemy will then become resistant to curse, not null. If that enemy is neutral to curse and she picks Joker, that enemy will become weak to curse. If they're weak, they get like a damage up bonus. They become like extra weak. It's like a super effective hit, right? In terms of like what teams she works with every team because she is kind of, molding the fight to her will, basically, based on what enemies or what units you're bringing. So obviously she works really well if they're already weak to the element because you're then adding like this extra weakness. So you're just getting more damage out of what already would have been good. Or she can make a backup team viable if you don't have a unit. I think Futaba's just like I said, 100% recommend. She makes everyone's life easier. If you've been saving pull currency, Futaba's probably one of the characters you've been saving for, and I 100% could not recommend you pull Futaba more. Even if you're totally free to play, I would spend some of those gem savings for a Futaba copy. And then following up Futaba is going to be Cherish. So Cherish is a Guardian, which is like a tank, same as Soy. Cherish is a defense buffer and shielder with some other kind of like buff potential with like damage up kind of stuff. His kit kind of reads to me like he's mainly just applying shields. He's applying defense up and has some other passive effects for the damage up, like I mentioned. He is a defense scaling unit, much like Fox, where his damage scales on defense, but he's not really here to pump damage. He's not a DPS. He's here to provide benefits to other units, and the other unit that would really benefit from him is Fox, right? It's the obvious synergy. Fox scales on defense and shields and all this other stuff, and Cherish, that's what Cherish does. He gives shields and he gives defense mainly, right? So if you have Fox, I think he could be useful. The problem is outside of Fox, I don't really see like an obvious fit for him on another team. The problem with the units like this is that they kind of get pigeonholed into being useful when their like defensive buffing can be used offensively, which is like Fox basically and no one else. And in this game, there's not really any content that wants you to kind of just be tanky for the sake of being tanky, or they want you to survive for a long time. It's kind of like, most boss fights are like 6 turns or less, right? So not to mention he's a standard banner unit. In theory, he's going to be added to the standard pool at some point, which I think makes him a skip for me. Next up on the list is going to be Haru, who is a sweeper unit, which is like an AoE DPS. And Haru is a Psy AoE DPS, who her kit has like a lot more gun damage interplay than I kind of thought before I had, read through the kit. I think she's going to be like a lot easier to understand when we get in game and I can actually use her. The gist of it seems like you want to be gaining these like customization stacks that she has by doing different things, and that kind of leads to damage up, and she's kind of just doing DPS things, right? In terms of teams for Haru, I think she kind of scales well with normal DPS buffing units like a Cord, obviously, but Haru is kind of like an ailment accuracy scaler, so similar to how like Summer Closer wants like max HP, and that affects kind of her attack stat. Haru kind of does the same, but based on ailment accuracy, and because of that, Summer Moko who provides ailment accuracy, is like a really good kind of sidekick to Haru. In terms of recommendations, I actually do think I would recommend Haru, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One being from the perspective of type coverage. There's not a lot of Psy units in this game in general, but looking forward into the future, I don't believe there's a single other Psy unit that gets released after Haru, let alone a Psy DPS. So after Haru comes out, we're gonna have 4 Psy units in the game. It'll be Haru, it'll be Summer Moko, it'll be regular Moko, and it'll be Riddle. And Haru is the only DPS in that bunch. So if you're looking for type coverage and you want at least one like kind of DPS or team to build around every unit, Haru is going to be your best and only bet for that. Futaba will make it easier to get around that a little bit, but obviously, you know, most people will probably still want a unit that can prey on the Psy enemy, and I think Haru is that. And the Haru lovers, like in our guild, are going to be eating good. I think our guild's going to have a couple of really busted Harus, because we have some serious Haru lovers who are going all in for Haru. And while I don't necessarily think you should, you know, A6, R6 Haru, I think if you have the gems and you kind of hold for Futaba, you skip Cherish, I think Haru, you know, could be worth trying to grab especially if you're looking at like a type coverage sort of thing. Next on the list is probably the character that I had the most difficult time deciding on. There was one other unit who I was kind of 50-50 on, but this one really I had to wrap my brain around this a little bit, because the next character is Mont Swan. So we already have Mont, but this is like a variant of Mont's character. She is an assassin, a single target DPS, and I believe the only dual type unit in the game. So Mont Swan is a wind and ice unit. And reading her kit, she seems to just like freely switch between the 2 elements. Although, like I said, I have not played, so I don't know, but it almost seems like she just kind of wants to like build a team around one of them and kind of stick in that. Maybe I'm wrong thinking that. Maybe it's like enemy dependent or fight dependent, but it does seem like she kind of just wants to pick one and then stick with it with her team, because she kind of gets these like follow-up stacks based on that element's damage that she's in the stance of. So it's a little bit confusing. This is another one where I think it'll be a lot easier to understand when you get in there and you like play it. But from what I can tell, TLDR, she's a single target DPS that fills kind of 2 element roles, and she's playing off some like follow-up stuff to synergize with like other elements that are the same as her, whatever form she's in. And obviously she's going to fit in with your standard DPS buffers like Core, Leon, etc. And then other ice and wind units depending on what form you plan on having her in during the fight. I think she also has good synergy with those units. In terms of recommendations here, I think this is one where if we didn't know what was coming after her, I would recommend you pull her, because she's really unique. If you're spending and you are kind of getting like every character, maybe you just skip the ones that are going to the standard, you know, then I think it's fine to pull her. I don't think it's like egregious to pull on her. But I do think that if you have Fox especially and Fleuret as like your 4-star, I don't know if she's like doing anything that's so game-changing that you have to spend currency on her. So I think I would probably recommend Mont as a skip, but again, I think we have the benefit of knowing what comes after, and there's 2 units kind of towards the end of this. Actually, it's the last 2 units that I think are both quite good, and I think that skipping Mont will help you kind of build up a nice gem pool for those 2 units. So I'm going to recommend Mont as a skip. All right, so next up we have Howler, who is a Saboteur. So she's more like a Key or a Vino or a Rin, who's like attacking and applying effects on the enemies rather than, you know, like a Cord who's applying buffs on you. So she seems to provide some good like defense shredding and like damage taken up in the form of like fire damage. She puts like lots of burns on. Follow-up damage too, if I read that correctly, which I think is a little bit strange, because I don't really know who that synergizes with all that well, but I don't really have a ton to say on her, honestly. She seems like pretty straightforward. Like the kit doesn't seem too crazy. I imagine she'll only get play on the fire teams. The best teams for her, I guess, from what we have in the game right now, would just be the on team, really. Maybe she'd get some use on a unit that we're not going to cover in this video, but comes shortly after, is like CNY Rin, who is a fire unit. But recommendation here for Howler is I think she has 2 things working against her right now. One, the same as Cherish. She's a standard banner unit, so it's really hard, especially with the characters that we know are following, to recommend you spend premium currency on her. And also, she just doesn't have a ton of use outside of these fire teams. I don't think, obviously, like I said, I don't know. People who've played these other versions probably have a much better idea than me. So yeah, I think a pretty easy skip in Howler. And then following Howler, like I said, is one of these kind of heavy hitters who, this might be the toughest call in the video, because I could see an argument both ways on it. But Violet is a assassin, single target, less DPS. Violet's just straight up, she epitomizes DPS in the sense that she's just looking to blow dudes up with less damage. She's using her highlight to do tons of single target damage, and that's kind of all you really need to know about her. She has transformations and stuff in her kit, so setup's not like super straightforward, but the gist of what she wants to do is she just wants to blow people up with the highlight, and she wants to do it as often as possible, which makes someone like Cord and you know, your standard kind of DPS buffer is really valuable for her. Cord especially for her because she does have so much reliance on the highlight, and even the persona that we covered in the last video is all about kind of buffing highlight damage, so you can kind of see where the interplay is. In terms of the recommendation, I think Violet's going to be really strong, and I think she falls into a strange position where, like, if you're in bad gem shape, I'll rephrase how I recommend this. She is a recommend on the condition that you're confident you'll be able to pull the next unit, who is spoiler alert, it's Wind Vast, who is going to be probably like the best buffer in the game for a very, very long time after she releases. So that's my recommendation is, yes, I think you should pull Violet, but only if you are 100% confident you're going to get Wind Vast on the following patch. And then, speak of the devil, here is Windvast, who is our last unit. Windvast is a strategist. She's just a straight buffer, basically. And an insane buffer at that. She does a crazy amount of, like, crit buffing and attack buffing based on her own crit damage. She's consuming tons of SP. She's, like, consuming all her SP every time she acts to give crit damage and do all this kind of crazy stuff. And the kit reads insane. I can only imagine in-game it will feel even more insane. I think she's going to be your like go-to buffer for every A-side team you do on a run of Guild Boss and SOS going forward. She works with every DPS that wants crit and attack, which is basically all of them. Yeah, like I mentioned at the start, the concept of this video was to plan around these 200% recommend units, and I will 100% recommend Windvast. I think that kind of covers it. I don't know if I have a ton else to say. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Like I said, I'm trying to broaden the content on this channel outside of just the boss fights, because I want to provide kind of more value than just like, hey, here's a boss fight and that's it. Like, I think there's a lot more that could be done in terms of teaching, showing interesting stuff. So hopefully I can keep coming up with ideas that you guys find interesting or helpful in some way. And yeah, as always, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you for your support. I will see you on the next one, and have a good one.